right, we're going to discuss position formats and a specific type of position format known as the Public Land Survey System. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as the PLSS, or what I tend to call it the Township Range and Section System, or TRS. The Public Land Survey System is duplicated for each various state in the western United States. So Montana has its own PLSS, and then Idaho over here starts out differently. It has a separate grid. And then down here in Wyoming, it has its own PLSS. So it starts over with a new grid once you cross the border. Here's how to think of it. Like a zip code would give a general description of an area or would direct you towards a specific area of the country, whereas your home address would narrow things down further to a specific location in your neighborhood. That's how the PLSS works. So the very largest grid to help identify a location looks like this across the entire state of Montana. And it's set up in a similar way to the latitude and longitude system, where there's a baseline that runs east-west across the state. And the grid, these tiny little grid markings here, the grid heads to the north from the baseline, and then it heads to the south from the baseline. Same thing for this, what's known as the principal meridian, which is similar to the prime meridian, right? So it's a line dividing the state, not perfectly in half, that runs north-south. So from the principal meridian and the baseline, between those two, you can get tiny little boxes that are 6 miles on a side. And if we look a little more carefully at that, each of those boxes is 6 miles high and 6 miles wide. It's just a random number. The way that they're numbered works from whether you're working from the principal meridian or the baseline. But so if we're assuming that we want to find, let's say we were on the in Teton County up here on the Rocky Mountain front, this tiny little square right here has a name that begins with what's called a township. And the townships start here at the baseline and they work north. And so this set of numbers indicates what each row of townships is called. So this row of townships here is called Township 1 North. All of these are Township 2 North. Anything way the heck up here is Township 36 North. Okay? Whereas if you go south of the baseline, this whole row here is called Township 1 South. Here's Township 7 South. So this whole row is Township 7 South. So if we come back up here to Teton County and we want to look at this township here, that township is Township 26 North. Okay? But you can see there are tiny squares all along the width of Montana in 26 North. So now we need to define which column it's in. We've defined the row, but now we need to define the column. And the columns are likewise numbered, with this being the dividing line, this principal meridian being the dividing line between all what are called the ranges to the east and the ranges to the west. So this column of grid squares is called range 10 east. Everything in this column is range 12 east. If I work over towards my intended square here, that is range 9 west. So the name for this particular grid right here is Township 26 North, range 9 west. And I can do that for any single one of these grid squares in the entire state. One thing that's a bit complicating, just for terminology's sake, is that these tiny grid squares, which are, again, 6 miles high and 6 miles wide, they're also called townships. So that entire thing is sometimes referred to as a township. Okay, whereas technically this entire row is called a township. Okay, so now we have the large scale grid. So if I direct you on this map to find Township 3 South, Range 41 East, you know that you're going to have to come south of the baseline to the third township down, Township 3, right? And then I'm going to find Range 41 East, and I'm going to find where they connect. And that is the broad scale area in the state, right there. Okay, defined by that township and that range. Now, that's kind of like a zip code in a sense, but if you want to get down into a home address, that's where we start taking a look at what are called the sections. So in my terminology, we have the townships and the ranges, and then we get down into the sections. So if this is my township and range grid around the entire state, again, here we would call this particular grid square T2S, so that's the written terminology, Township 2 South. And the written terminology for the Range 3 West is R3W. Within that area there, I can further define, because that's a 6 mile by a 6 mile piece of landscape, and that covers a lot of terrain. So I can further subdivide that 6 mile by 6 mile block of Township 2 South and Range 3 West into smaller 1 mile square blocks. Okay? And each one of these smaller 1 mile square blocks, or each one of these smaller 1 mile square blocks, there's 36 of them. Does that make sense? Because this whole thing is 6 miles on a side. Remember I said these blocks are 6 miles on a side. So if you take a 6 mile on a side block, you're going to have 6 1 mile blocks going across the width of it, and 6 1 mile blocks going across the height of it. So each of these 1 mile on a side blocks is called a section. So, for example, this 1 mile square parcel of land in Township 2 South, Range 3 West is called Section 14. And so the description of this whole chunk of land that's a mile on a side would be T2S R3W S14, or Section 14. Okay, and I'm going to now switch over to CalTopo so you can see what that looks like on an actual topographic map. So we're now looking at a topo map of the volcano reef area on the Rocky Mountain front, and these red dashed lines on the topo map show the sections. This grid does not show the townships and ranges because they're so large. It's such a large area. I will show you on a paper map how to find the township and range. For now, we're just now diving down into the smaller, like home address, which are the sections. Okay, we'll worry about the zip codes when we get into the classroom. So this is how big from side to side and from top to bottom? That's a mile. So it's a mile on a side, and this is called a section. And this section happens to be section 11. Notice that the numbers are going to repeat. So there's section 9, section 10, section 11. And we've got these funny things here, PB44, PB38, PB39. What's PB44 versus 11, or PB45 versus 14? Some of these areas were never fully and formally surveyed by the original surveyors in the state of Montana. And so they've just been left as kind of incompletely surveyed regions. And so they don't get a normal section number. They're called PB44, which stands for protracted boundary. Doesn't really matter that much. But if I zoom out, I can see there's my section 14 there. And what I should find if I keep moving farther down the line is I'm going to come up with another section 14 right there. How did I know I would find that? Because this set of 36 sections is repeated over and over and over again across the entire state. And there's only 36 of them, right? Because there's 36 1-mile sections in each township. So I could start, I'll go back up to Volcano Reef in a minute, but I could find section 1. I want to get away from those protracted boundaries because they make things a little bit confusing. But I could start here on a section 1 and notice I move, at least in the top part of each township, I'm going to move section 1, section 2, section 3, section 4, section 5, section 6, and then I drop down. 7, 8, 9, 10. It reminds me of that game you used to play when you were little kids called Candyland. So 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I drop down. 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Then, whoops, I drop down. 19. And then I go back again. So I keep doing this until I drop down, come all the way back across to section 30, drop down to 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, and there's section 36. And when I'm done with section 36, I drop down and start all over again. Here's my next section 1. And that is for the township to the south of this township. So I'm going to have a block, if I zoom out a little bit, I'm going to have a block that's bordered by section 1 to section 6, down to 31 and 36. So if you notice, and I'm going to I'll add a line. Well, actually, I'll add a polygon. So here's section 1, section 6. Oh, darn it. Snap to none. Down to 31, over to 36, and back up again. What I just did was I just went around the boundaries of a particular township, or township, let's say 28 north, range 17 west. I just made that up. So this is a block of 36 individual square miles, right? And it has a township and a range number. And this exact same block of 36 is repeated up here. Here's 1, here's 6, here's 31, here's 36. And then it repeats again. 1, 6, 31, 36. Those are the 4 corners of any given township range block. Okay? So if I come back over, I'm going to come back over to my section 11, which is one of the knobs, included in Volcano Reef, this for sort of westernmost knob, and then these 2 knobs. We'll look at these and define how do we describe their location with this township range and section system. So within this 1 mile on a side square, I can further subdivide that. And so if I add a line, a couple lines here like this, I'll go around the outside of the entire thing like so. Right? And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to make a grid square like that. Okay. So I just took section 11 and I broke it up into 4 quadrants. This quadrant would be considered the northeast quadrant. This quadrant is considered the northwest quadrant. So what would be the description of this location, this knoll right here? How would you describe that within the quadrant system of section 11? That would be considered the southeast quadrant. So I could say to somebody that I'm on top of a knoll in the southeast quarter. We don't call them quadrants. But I would say I'm in the southeast quarter of section 11. But notice that the southeast quarter of section 11, how wide is that on a side? How much space is it from here to here? Is it a quarter mile? That's a quarter, right? No, that is a half a mile. So a half a mile here and a half a mile here makes up a quarter of the section. So a half a mile is a lot of terrain. So if I need to be more specific, then I'm going to need to cut this quarter or quadrant up into 4 more quarters. I can get even more specific. So I'm going to do a different color scheme here. And shoot. And I'm going to move across. I did not do that very perfectly, but you'll live. Okay, so there's my quadrants, right? So I've further subdivided this southeast quarter of the whole section 11, further subdivided it into 4 subquarters. So within this subquarter system, each one of these has a name. So I could say that this is the northwest quarter of the southeast quarter. Okay? I could say that this area in here is the southwest, right? Southwest quarter of the southeast quarter. So if I asked you to be much more specific about this location here, I would give a township, I would give a range, then I would say section 11, and I would say it's in the northeast quarter of the southeast quarter. Okay, now I'm going to give you a minute and I want you to tell me the same description, location for this point. So we don't know the township and the range, but we would figure that out on a paper map. Then we would say section 11. So township 29 north, range 14 west, section 11. What would I define that location as? I would call that the southeast quarter of the northeast quarter. Does that ring a bell? Okay, we'll just line it out and we'll make sure you understand how we got that. So if I'm going to divide this quadrant up, I'm going to come across the middle like this, and then I'll come up here, and then I'll divide it down the middle. Not doing such a good job of perfect breaking my subquarters up. But so again, that particular knoll right there would be in the southeast quarter of the northeast quarter of section 11. So the southeast quarter is this purple square here, and the northeast quarter is the red outline up here. So I would say township, range, section, and then I'm in the southeast quarter of the northeast quarter. Okay, so I expect that you will be able now to find any location on a topographic map that has sections printed on them, or the township range and section system printed on them, and give me a defining name in that PLSS, Public Land Survey System, or the TRS, Township Range and Section System. So for example, this peak here, peak this peak is identified with an X, which is a type of benchmark, and then the altitude is 6,614 feet. And so if you were to identify within section 9 what the quarter and quarter sections are, what would you say? First of all, what I would do is again, divide this whole thing up, and I'm just going to do it visually without drawing a line through it, but we know that it is in this quarter here, right? In section 9. And what's that quarter called? The southwest quarter, okay? So we know that. Now we have to visually break this quarter up, this southwest quarter. So I'm going to visually break it up here and here, okay? And so now that I've done that, I can see that peak, 6614, is in the southeast quarter of the southwest quarter. Okay, so be prepared to identify the campsite locations where you camped during the trek using this system, and any other locations that I throw at you. Okay.